Greetings, nerds. This is SNN Nerd. I'm your host, Sarah Belmont, and with me, as always, is our Mr. Producer, Will Polk. How are you doing today, Will?
I'm doing very well this afternoon, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. You know, it's been a while since we last recorded.
I know. We were just trying to put the timeline back together. You know, Barry Allen just has a way of blowing things up, so you just never know if it was yesterday or in the future or in the past.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Barry Allen anymore. I mean, I think that there's been more Arrow headlines lately than anything else.
Yeah, there has been. Well, except for Grant Gustin vaping on a plane, but you know.
We don't talk about that.
We won't go there.
Well, you did go there. I'm just gonna point that.
Yeah, no, we won't go into it any further other than saying, hey, it happened, and yeah, so and the show wrapped. So, but anyway.
Yeah, that show wrapped. Arrow's wrapping. Emily Bett is wrapping. And that was the big news. Is that I think it's fascinating, the timeline of events, because you have them announce that last season, 10 episodes. Mm-hmm. And then a week later you have Emily announce, like, not only is the show going to stop after the 8th season, but I'm actually not going to even go into being a regular on this 8th season. And so I thought that was odd, because usually you get like the cast announcements before they talk anything about the series itself. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it was money. We know that her play she's doing seems to be going to New York. And she's going to be leading that. And maybe they knew the whole time, because I didn't have an emotional reaction to that. I was just thinking about how stupid we were, because all of the clues are there in this season's plot line about everything in 2040.
Yeah.
Gives indication that she is not around. Like nobody knew that she had a kid. So that tells me that something happened. Like, they put her in hiding way before she even started showing. They didn't even realize she was pregnant.
And only Oliver and Diggle were in the wazzer about it. But which of course, so in story it makes sense. You're right, and it's a shame that we missed it. But I think I think there was just, with the flash forwards, everybody was focusing on story like, is she dead or not dead? And of course we called it correctly that she was indeed alive in 2040. But beyond that, we outside of universe, we completely missed the fact that, hey, she may not be around for a subsequent season.
Right. And I think that we're also focusing on all the ways where the flash forwards won't end up being true.
Yeah. And even
whether it's Earth 2 or Barry correcting the timeline, any little chance that maybe that's not how Star City would look in 2040. And it's like, this is just another nail in that coffin. Like, no, they're fully committed to this. Mm-hmm. Despite all of our, like, really, that's what happened. How does that make sense in terms of what the whole point of this series has been since the beginning? It was making Star City a better place.
So and even Beth even teased about the fact that there could be a backdoor. This was a whole backdoor to a possible spinoff. Mm-hmm. And so we've had that news as well. So, you know, there's a lot, and it could very well. I mean, she did sign a long-term deal with WB to develop more shows. So maybe not immediately, but they definitely are keeping their options open as far as a possible spinoff.
Yeah. In other news, the Joker trailer dropped. Yeah. What were your initial thoughts?
As you know, I was not very thrilled early on about the prospect of a Joker film. Felt like the Venom film with Joker with no Batman, like Spider-Man, Venom with no Spider-Man. But when I saw that trailer, I guess it was maybe Wednesday or Thursday last week. Oh my gosh, I've done a 180. I'm 100% sold on this thing as far as being a character study. Again, it gets into the comic book universe as far as, yes, there is the possibility of having, I think in the comic book there is actually 3 Jokers. And with this film, it looks like it's a prequel, where we're seeing Gotham, set in the backdrop of New York, so it's very gritty, Martin Scorsese, 70s New York City vibe to it that, I'm really, really looking forward to this film now. And whereas before I wasn't, and it could be that kind of prequel story that does lead to the Bat, where the way this trailer sort of played out looks like how he was angry, but then he becomes like the jokes on everyone else. And I'm laughing at this torment and how people are treating me. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess this is the genius of Joaquin Phoenix and why he's such a phenomenal actor. And, that 2.5 minute trailer really sold me on this film.
Yeah. I agree with pretty much everything you just said. I think that this is the best production that DC has come out with, like the style, the cinematography, and just the design of Gotham City. It felt more along the line of what Christopher Nolan built. Like there was, you could literally, the images, they felt real. They felt like a real city, a real down in the dumps city, but just, it felt more like, no, this could actually be a place. And I appreciate that, because that's my biggest complaint over, with a lot of the current DC films is I'm like, too much green screen, too much. It's just, it takes me out of it. And I was watching a few different trailer reviews, and everybody's saying the same things. And then this morning I watched Kind of Funny, and Kevin Coella actually brought up an idea that ever since I heard it, I'm like, yeah, that's the only way this works. And he said, the ending of this movie needs to be that actually this is a story the Joker is telling Harley Quinn.
Oh, yeah.
That way, the purity of the Joker's origin story stays intact, and you can make it Jared Leto. You can make it played by somebody else, whoever is the present Joker. It doesn't have to be Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah.
Like this is a one-off, and that's what I keep. So when you say prequel, I'm like, yeah, but prequel to what?
Yeah.
Captain Marvel made so much money, still making money, and works so well because it's a prequel to an actual universe. It's a prequel to the Avengers themselves, and it's just like, what is this a prequel to? And if it's a one-off, why? Why do you need it? Nobody wants it. Right. Nobody has ever said like, oh, I really want to know the origin story of Joker. No, there's something so pure in that, not knowing that, why would you take that away? And so when he said that in his analysis, I'm like, yeah, now I'm going to go into that movie. And if they don't do that, I'm going to be very disappointed.
Yeah. Be set up to be disappointed. But I guess it could, I mean, as far as this, I've heard people complain about origin stories and blah, blah, blah. And there was the story, The Killing Joke, that was written, I want to say in the late 80s. So that was sort of an origin story for the Joker. So there is that's out there. So, for some of the folks to complain about that, and I was in that camp in some regards with, again, why do you need a Joker film without Batman? But again, I think what you just said with the Kind of Funny folks, and that just makes total sense. And you're right.
Especially with everything they're doing with Harley Quinn. Like they're putting a lot of emphasis on her, and they're coming out with the Birds of Prey movie. So to have that twist at the end and have Margot Robbie, like, yeah, Suicide Squad did not set up a universe that I care for. I haven't even seen it. Yeah. But this way, like a film like this and what they presented with the trailer, I'm intrigued with that film and that universe. Mm-hmm. And so you can sort of tie it together.
Right. You can. You can. You can. And maybe this is how they do it. You're right, though. That is so, I didn't think about that, with the Harley Quinn angle. And, since they have invested so much, this is a way to keep these characters, with the one-off Joker movie, and maybe with this Birds of Prey being a one-off film as well, and all the things going on with Suicide Squad 2, which is not a reboot. It seems that they're going to be doing a continuation of that story. Those all make sense.
Right. And I think just like, if they do that, this is a true character study, because I think a lot of us watching that trailer, it's a very good, well put together trailer, and it has some good dialogue. There's clearly a story, and I just think, like, if you get that twist of the narration, you suddenly realize, like, this is why he's such an infamous villain character, because he does manipulate others. He knows how to tell those stories and to make you feel sympathy when really you should be terrified and it's all lies. Like, that's what he does. So I think it would be a brilliant move. But we'll see what happens for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. So This week also, Cloak and Dagger came back for season 2.
Yep.
2 brand new episodes, back to back. I feel like they did that in season 1 as well.
They did.
And you kind of got that, like with the first episode, it was a lot of, this is how long it's been, this is where these characters are. They're the worst vigilantes. They just really are.
Yeah.
I have no idea what they're doing.
Nope.
That was made abundantly clear.
Yeah. Which one do you want to start with?
What do you mean?
As far as who's the worst vigilante, Ty or Tandy?
Yeah, we can start with Tyrone.
Okay. Yeah, Ty, he, well, I guess just the series does jump forward a little bit in time, just, set up to remind folks at the end of season 1, they saved the world. And, but also, Ty was framed for, the corrupt cop's murder. So they think he's a cop killer. And so we're left with Tyrone now living in the church, and Tandy has reestablished her connection with her mother, and living with her mom. And so Ty now is the one-man crusader who is going to take on the drug world in New Orleans. And in the process of doing so, just messes up Detective O'Reilly's and the New Orleans Police Department's efforts to try to end a potential gang war. And in fact, by his actions, he ends up exacerbating the situation. So, yeah. So, and also stumbling upon a human trafficking, ring as well.
Yeah. And it's, I forgot how well written this show was. And then I started watching the first episode, and then the second episode just capitalized on it.
Yeah.
And because you have 2 central characters, and so you get to see both perspectives, and I like how, even though they save the world and they're suddenly team, you get the feeling like they don't realize how connected or how much they truly need each other. They think they do. They have movie nights and everything. Tandy's one of the few people who actually knows where he is. She did not know he was going out there. He didn't realize that she was also doing her own thing. Yep. And then I like how both of those paths intersect and overlap and cross to where, like, no, guys, remember, you are fighting for the same thing. You may not realize it, but you are. You're still on the same path. And something that I just could not help thinking about during these episodes was, why does Tandy have so much power? Like, I feel like her power keeps evolving, and I'm like, why can only Tyrone do like one magic trick? Maybe two, because we don't know where that cop went last season, but still it feels very imbalanced.
It is
and unfair.
It is imbalanced, and I think because even throughout season 1, you're right, she definitely moved along at a faster pace with controlling and understanding how to use her power. Sometimes by happenstance, like I know there was a situation where she tried to commit suicide in season 1, and then that emotionally being in peril caused her to figure out a way to save herself. There was, and this season we saw that again, like when in episode 2, when the truck was coming, she figured out how to basically create like a light crystal. and of course, even in season 1, and we saw it here in season 2, she's able to throw her light daggers and stuff. So I think she might just be, even though she has a lot of trauma in her life with her father, issues with Roxanne, and then of course she thought he was a very heroic figure, but she ends up turning out that her father actually was a domestic abuser. It seems that Sandy is very open to exploring her powers and testing the limits, and even though Tyrone is probably the more book smart between the two of them, she's very street smart, and because of that street smarts and that savviness, is willing and able to be more free to explore her powers and explore the experiences, and so hers, so her almost emotional intelligence and everything is actually higher than his, and I think and since their powers are so tied to their emotions, and in some ways she has a better handle on hers than he does, it opens her up to being able to do these things better than he can at this point.
Right. I don't know if she can do it better, because she keeps or maybe draining power.
Yeah, or maybe not better, but maybe she's just, as you're saying, the imbalance. Maybe she's just further along in doing certain things than he can.
Maybe. Since you brought up book smarts, though, I do have to point out, or ask the question, what is Tyrone doing studying thermal dynamics? I mean, the kid is on the run from the police. Is he really going to apply to college?
Yes, he is.
I don't understand.
Well, no, I think it's so Ty in this church, he's trying to hold on to as many quote unquote normal things, at least in his world, that he can. And Ty, prior to all this going down, he was on that track of being, he was the quote unquote good kid who was doing the right things, and he was excelled in the classroom. He excelled on the basketball court. So he had all these things going for him. And then now, because of what happened with the detective and being on the run, all that has fallen apart for him. So the only thing for him studying and continuing to hit those books not only continues his trying to have some normalcy, but also I think this show is they're not afraid of taking on issues and being very grounded in some things. And so Ty, being an African American male, and obviously his parents in that home really instilled the value of education and everything on him, it just continues that part of his background and his history as well, that, I'm going to one day become free of this allegation, and I've got to stay sharp and be ready for whatever my life brings me after all this. So I think it was just very consistent with his character while he was sitting there studying thermodynamics, which I'm like, man, high school kid taking thermo, wow. But it's just consistent with what we know of him.
Right. No, I like that idea that in light of everything, he's trying to retain a sense of normalcy, considering how his life got turned literally upside down. I then, and after thinking about it through that lens, it makes me think maybe by the end of the season or by the end of season 3, there's going to be a decision between continuing that path or fully embracing the vigilante lifestyle, because it's interesting how he's trying to retain that normalcy, yet he's still going out there every night. He's still following the drug lords, because he had that very impassioned moment with Tandy where he's like, I can't do nothing. Like, I know this is going on, and I want to do what I can to help. It's a very Spider-Man moment.
Mm-hmm. It is.
With the responsibility of having that power. So I think that he's going to have to make a decision, because, I mean, you can only do so much. Like, and what really is a priority going to be for him moving forward? Because he's probably going to wind up in more trouble down the line if he continues on what he's doing now. I mean, vigilantes aren't heroes. Right. They're not going to get deputized.
No, they're not. Not in this universe.
The shade.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a good juxtaposition to what's going on with Tandy, because part of the reason why she doesn't know what he's doing is he feels like she's now in so much of a better place.
Yeah.
But what we realize over the course of these 2 episodes is that she knows how to put up a good front, but mentally she is more tormented than ever by what happened with her parents' marriage. I mean, there was that great moment in the 2nd episode where she sees her dad in the street, and Olivia did a great job portraying that moment, because her facial expression didn't change, and you could just see it in her eyes about how terrified she was.
Yeah, she was definitely terrified in that moment when she saw him coming down the street. And that, I mean, those scenes with her torment and her pain, and when she's in the support group with the other survivors, really comes out very, very well. And also her, I don't want to say brokenness, but her sense of wanting to empower others, really, and not taking them from where they are at their place in their journey, because she's almost like, okay, yes, I'm a survivor and my mother's a survivor, and you know, and we got through this, and it's almost like a paternal kind of instinct that she has, kind of like she has sometimes with Ty, where she just takes it upon herself to like want to fix it. And unfortunately with the one survivor, it ended up backfiring to the point where, you know, she ends up getting taken by the trafficking ring, and ends up in the hospital. But again, it was a very grounding moment for Tandy to realize that, oh, you know, I'm not all powerful either, and she's still, you know, when she's in this dance studio trying to, you know, work through those emotions and feelings, and continues to stumble and fall. It's very, you know, it's very grounded and realize that, you know, it reminds us that these 2 characters are still kids, and they're still growing and still learning. So, I mean, I didn't realize how much I missed the show until it came back this week, and I was really excited for it. And like you said at the very beginning, they're great at storytelling, and really why this separates this show from some of the others that are out there that, you know, is very grounded. But, oh yeah, by the way, these folks have superpowers as well.
Right. So they end the 1st episode with Tandy and Tyrone staking out a meetup of all of these drug lords. And then they have planted a device to record the conversation to get Detective O'Reilly what she needs. And it ends up in bloodshed, and everybody dies. And Tyrone and Tandy are very confused. But what happens is that's what concludes the 1st episode. To start the 2nd episode, you find this drawing of what we learn is of a they. which is an invocation or a transactional prayer used to summon a Loa. So a question can be answered or a request can be made. And first of all, how much time did that person have to draw the Vevey? That's what I want to know. Because that was very articulate, and I was just like, he's just bleeding out. Like, like, what is going on? I get why they did it. But see, this is another thing I forgot about, is the voodoo and the spirituality of this show and who Tandy and Tyrone are. I mean, we're not talking about characters who had a particle accelerator explode or was sent to an island. These two characters are purposely planted in New Orleans, and there's a mythology there that they continue to intertwine with where they come from and where their powers come from. Mm-hmm. So to have that continued is great. I want to know where it takes us. I know it's going to have something to do with mayhem for sure. Mm-hmm. But I really liked, again, just that moment of Tyrone talking with Evita's aunt about it and her explaining where it comes from, and then him also being assigned his own Vevey. I forget which one, but it had something to do with being at a crossroads, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you originally I thought mayhem was Mama Brigitte, but do you think by the end we're going to see Mama Brigitte, or is that just going to be more of a myth that is brought up?
I think that, given that this show dabbles in the supernatural, I think it's probably going to, but at the same time still tries to have some grounding. I think it's probably going to be a myth.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, but it will, but just like they'll use it like they did in season 1 to build up the construct of the divine pairing. Mm-hmm. I think it'll be the same for mayhem.
Okay. Speaking of mayhem. Yeah. What were your thoughts about Detective O'Reilly and Mayhem, who we learn by the end of the second episode are technically two different people, but still have the same face?
So I like that. I guess, because we haven't really talked about Bridget much at all so far, and so just again to reset for folks who are maybe it's their first time watching the show. At the end of last season, Tyrone and Tandy save New Orleans and the world from Roxxon. They learned that there was this energy that was under the city. And so where we left O'Reilly, she got, I think she was dumped into the river, if I recall. I can't remember exactly how she ended up in the swamp, but basically, she comes out of the swamp, and we learn that that's where she's infused with these powers. And so, when they showed us at the end of this episode that there were actually two, that it was a split, it got me. I was like, wow. So, cause all this time I thought it was truly a Jekyll. I figured it was just going to do the normal Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing. And we just, whatever reason, something triggers it and she becomes into this mayhem persona. But when it was actually two separate individuals, there's so much they could play with that.
Right.
And because when we find, I'll say Bridget 1, we find a person who is definitely traumatized, has a lot of PTSD. She's trying to work her way back from all the things that happened, from her boyfriend getting murdered to the just things that happen at the end of the first season. And then we get this character of Mayhem that is unveiled with, in that scene in the park with, well, I guess there was that moment where she was looking in the reflective pool.
Yep, it was the bar.
Yeah.
Bridget went out drinking, gets wasted, and then she stumbles out of the bar, and then you think that she's having a vision of this other person who looks like her, sounds like her, but isn't. But no, it's actually Mayhem, and Mayhem ties her up and then goes out and tries to play detective.
Yep. Yes, with very judge, jury, and executioner results, mind you.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's funny how you let it with, like, how her name is Bridget, which sounds a lot like Brigitte. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna definitely, Mama Brigitte is at play here. I don't know if that's who Mayhem is, like a real name for Mayhem, but, or maybe Mayhem's just a follower of Mama Brigitte, for all we know. And also, as you were talking about what's going on with Detective O'Reilly, it made me think about how this is a much better way to portray the duality. Mm-hmm. And that's what this show often does. It's the duality of these characters, Tyrone and Tandy being opposite sides of that same coin. And now you get that with Detective O'Reilly as well, who's kind of facing a reflection, probably a reflection she doesn't recognize clearly, but is still part of her, maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're gonna talk about Doom Patrol, but I want to say, like, the second episode, it does a narrative change that, again, I forget how well this show is written, but having that, retaining the multiple perceptions of the same day, mm-hmm. and just having that replay again and again and again. I think Doom Patrol did it better, though. And because Doom Patrol recently had an episode that's constructed very similar to that, but I think in the end, Doom Patrol pulled it off better. And not to say that what Cloak and Dagger did was awful. No. It just, if I'm comparing both of them, there's a clear winner, in my opinion, based on how they ended it.
Yeah. And to be fair, I mean, this is only the second episode of season 2 for Cloak and Dagger, but I would agree with you that so far Doom Patrol definitely has pulled this narrative through the multiple perspectives much better. I would agree with you there. Yeah. The therapy episode is genius. I loved it. I thought it was so clever. It was so good. It was so engaging, and it does get this show back on track. Mm-hmm. It's kind of had a rocky middle of the season for me, where I just started to lose interest, but I love how they start with Rita, and she's literally stuck in a furnace. Yeah. Literally. Yeah. But she's worried about rats. She's worried about rats. Don't forget that. Hold on to the rat.
Remember the rat. And then you have Larry just being Larry. You have Jane, who's also working through some daddy issues mm-hmm. with the chief. And then I forgot about Cyborg and what he's dealing with in the terms of when they went through, like, Mr. Nobody Land. I don't know what we want to call this anymore. Yeah. And he remembers how he got to where he is now, and it all was based off of him killing his mom. Yeah. That's a lot to work through that he still hasn't. And then Cliff is just brilliant. Like, this was a Cliff episode. Like, I loved it. I love how he's mad because his daughter has a father who was his best friend, And he suddenly finds the need to do therapy with everyone, and he should never be a counselor.
Never. Even though he was the main one calling for it, it was just, but you're just Brendan Fraser did his voice work for Cliff, and I can't remember the actor who does the actual body work for Cliff, Robot Man, but it's just a tour de force as far as just everything to convey emotions in a armored Robot Man suit, and the voice work. And yeah, I mean, Cliff should not be leading a therapy. He has the bedside manner of like an animal.
When Vic says, "I killed my mom," Cliff is happy.
Yeah.
It's like, yay. That's what thank you, bread and butter. Okay, we're getting somewhere now. And it's like, no. Like, he just wanted more baggage from everybody, and it was like,
bring it to me, more.
Even though at the end of the day, this is exactly what they needed. Like, everybody's been sort of on their own journeys, not realizing that they are a team with a common goal, and how they need to understand where each other is. And I thought that was so great.
It is great. And I know we both, we haven't mentioned it here on the podcast, but I know just talking offline as far as how we kind of felt the series was meandering a little bit, and it was some hard episodes, especially when they, but I think the one episode that it was hard for me to get through, but I'm glad that I did, was with the original Doom Patrol. Mm-hmm. And their mental issues and the issue and the fact that they didn't work through them, and how Mr. Nobody actually used that against them to cause that team to implode. Whereas this, so I think one of the reasons why Therapy Patrol works so well, not only because of the multiple perspectives and just the cathartic nature of all these characters, just downloading everything in that session, even with Cliff's terrible bedside manner. It was necessary for them to do that, to basically expose their vulnerabilities to each other, in order to, because at the end of the day, we have to remember they're still building themselves up as a team. They're not there yet. Mm-hmm. And so showing how that team from the failures of the other team, and how Mr. Nobody was able to conquer them, I think Therapy Patrol works because we see by them doing this in their own ass backward fighting way, and how Cliff is only like 1/64th of Jane at this point. It's it's necessary for it to happen so that they can grow and then become to really trust one another.
Right. So we're giving Cliff a really hard time. I would argue that Jane has a worse bedside manner than he does.
Oh yeah.
Because she calls it out that he'll never be a father because he isn't a real man. And that's the truth of the matter. Like, you cannot be her father anymore. That's a dream that died, literally.
Yeah.
And then that's where the comment of, I only like 1/64th of you, which is true in a way. I mean, anytime Jane changes to another persona, and Cliff tries to revert back to Jane, and which again is part of the reason why I think this episode works so well, besides everything that you just stated, is really, like, I love Jane and Cliff when they get at it together. There's such great chemistry between those two characters, and they're both, they both like to tell it how it is. And, I think that, like, there's so much good writing when they're on screen.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we see that both in Therapy Patrol, and then later in the next episode of Danny Patrol.
Danny! Oh, Danny!
Yeah, but yeah, that relation, that father-daughter dynamic, the pairing that those two have, and you talk about people knowing each other's vulnerabilities, and Jane to just drop that and just basically rip out Cliff's heart by saying that. Yeah, you're right. She definitely has the worst bedside manner as far as the therapy session. And I want to go back to Vic a little bit too, because I know we haven't talked about him much. I was, one of the things I liked his journey. I enjoyed his journey the most on Therapy Patrol, because in that he comes to the team, the Justice League member who is hero, and we, even in Danny Patrol, Larry calls him out on it. You're Mr. Hero, and so to see his backstory as far as the feelings of responsibility for the loss of his mother, but also fast forward to again, a good way of trying to ground this show in reality of him being a young adult and trying to do things like date, and it was very funny, with the I laughed. I had some laugh out loud moments with the Tinder
yes
app and trying to date, and swiping through, and when folks found out he was cyborg, he had all the hangers on, and the things that heroes will quote unquote have to deal with, that they were trying to have a romantic life, and then but when he did find someone, and then he was spying on her on the bus, and it reminded you of it really gave a good, for me at least, understanding as far as how Vic, what a difficult life Vic has, because he is this man machine, and at the one hand he's trying to have a normal life, but on the other hand he's literally having the ability to cyber stalk someone in a very creepy kind of way that it's just. And then it's also, you have his father in the background who is also monitoring everything that he does, and he has no privacy or no sense of, alone moments or whatever, because of the way he's constructed. So Vic has a lot of issues himself that it seems that we're just scratching the surface on.
Well, especially what also Jane does during the therapy session is reveals her portrait that shows him killing all of the Doom Patrol members, and in a very similar way of what happened to his mom. So I like how they took the character who is the quote unquote normal hero.
Yeah.
And he may be the one to kill them all. He's destined to do something that he doesn't want to, and so I like how they put that burden on him. And they did that probably so he could work through what happened with his mom and how he got his powers to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then really who stole the show was the rat at the end.
And whiskers.
Because this is what this show does. You something is wrong with Cliff. But you don't realize is that at the very beginning of the episode, Mr. Nobody, he has one of those narrator moments, and he convinces this rat hey, they just killed your mom. Go and fuck them.
Yep.
And that's what he does, and he gets into Cliff's system and screws it all up, and it's just, it was so perfect to have that end, because this episode was already good, and then they just elevated it with 2 minutes of screen time to great, if not perfection. And I was just that's beautiful.
It was totally beautiful, and I can't say anything more than what you just said about it. It's just an amazing moment, but that's what makes Doom Patrol, why we like this show so much.
Yeah, and I like how Cliff and Jane get into that heated debate, and he says the infamous 1/64th of Jane, which leads into the next episode with Danny, because while Larry and Vic are figuring out Danny and trying to control that situation, Cliff and Rita are off to protect Jane from another one of her identities by the name of Karen, who is the girl from every romantic comedy that is creepy as fuck. Yep. Which makes sense. Like, there's something to be said about how these writers are utilizing all 64 personalities of Jane in a way that is telling one complete story. Yeah. Like, that's, talk about a hard thing to pull off. But it made complete sense why, with what occurred, why this personality resurfaced.
Yeah, it does. It does. And God, the Karen, any of those like creepy rom-coms that you just referenced, watched it, we've all seen them, and Diane Guerrero plays that Karen character to a fault. That type of character. And I think, Rita was in a very interesting place trying to pull Jane out because Jane, the volatile character, I guess, being that it is, and Rita still, working through her own issues as far as trying to find herself and her purpose, trying to help Jane with this insidious, this Karen who is probably one of the more dangerous types of, the person, 64 personalities that Jane has. It was, I'm glad they paired them off initially, and showing how this was just wrong. And, it was one of the things that stood out to me with what Rita, told Karen was, will this person, I can't remember the guy's, the hapless love interest, will he really truly love her without the, psycho powers that Karen was using to control him? I mean, take that away, will he really love you? And that was, for Rita to say that, because especially given where Rita's coming from and trying to find her own belonging and her own sense of self, and telling that to Karen was very important to me, in to show how insidious this character actually, this personality is, as far as, and dangerous how Karen is.
Rita is she's a character who I'm slowly figuring out. She doesn't always get her due. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not a big fan of the character of Rita, but what I'm noticing is she's very much lives up to her name, mm-hmm. and she's very elastical, because mm-hmm. you pair her up with a character and suddenly you're like, that is an interesting dynamic. Like, early on in the season, her and Larry got paired up a lot. Yep. Those two are great because they're very much kindred spirits. Mm-hmm. They come from another decade. They come from another time. They both have self-hatred, and being what they are now, it's even more in the forefront, all of those nasty, undeserving of trying to have a normal life. Yeah. Excuse me. And now with the fact that Rita gets paired up with Jane, I'm like, why isn't there more of you two together? Because, I mean, Cliff and Jane have the father-daughter dynamic, but Rita and Jane are like, sometimes they're sisters, mm-hmm. like Rita's older sister, and sometimes it's the mother-daughter, and you're just like, these two also have really good, they bring out something in each other that is so refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes back to what we were talking about with Therapy Patrol, in that by having all these pairings, one with each character having an episode with one another, it builds that sense of team. And even though they are very dysfunctional and very abnormal in their behavior sometimes, at the end of the day, I could see where they're building and how they're building this, because they're going to need to be, again, as I said before, they're going to have to trust one another so that Mr. Nobody can't turn all those things that they're like fighting through and struggling through right now against them.
Yeah, exactly. And I like how Danny, we spent a lot of time with Vic and Larry, who I don't think we've had that pairing before, and they also they didn't spend as much time. This was more of a Larry centric, because we finally figure out what's with that badge he always is looking at, and it's from his past, and we realize it's from the the Bureau of Normalcy.
Yeah.
Which I like, how the Bureau is after some street, and yet they haven't stumbled upon this house where all of these weird, wacky people are living. No, talk about unnormal.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was there was a lot of political parallels brought up in what the Bureau of Normalcy represented, as well as what Danny and his street, his town, whatever you wanted to call it, represents, especially when you have the opening of the soldier who gets lost, and then you realize, like, walking through those streets, he found a home because he can be a she, and she can live that life how she wants to, and some great moments with Larry. I love how they make you think he's embracing who he's always wanted to be, and have this moment of we can do this together. I'm part of this, and yet he ended up not taking the mic. He doesn't want it.
He doesn't want it, yeah. And I love that scene. It was just again, it was that feel, where's the show can get dark, but also has that lightness and moment, and that was just a very empowering moment that, anyone watching that, if you're feeling down about yourself or your identity or whatever, basically Danny the Street was a place where Morris, the agent, was able to find himself, and it seemed that, like you said, Larry was getting there too, but at that moment he still wasn't really able to do so until we had the final act on Danny the Street, where Danny was, where Morris comes out and he was like, I got to go back, and then of course the Bureau of Normalcy finds them, and they have that showdown in the middle of the street, and Larry did finally take the mic.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's another great episode of this show. These two back to back, I'm so glad I waited, because I actually watched them same day, almost back to back, and they lead into each other so much that I'm so glad I didn't spend a week being like, oh, I wonder what happens next. And that's what I'm learning about these shows. Sometimes they work better if you do watch two back to back, because Doom Patrol has been doing this in particular, where they like do story arcs, rather than one-offs. Titans. Okay, I'm gonna go there now. So Titans would just do episode 1, one-off, episode 2, one-off, episode 3, and it's like, what's happening? And then this show, it's like, okay, like there's these two back to back, these two, it's much more, the threads continue into the later episodes rather than it just being a complete one-off.
Yep, exactly. And Therapy Patrol, it was it could be viewed as a bottle show, but it really is not. You're right. If you watch Therapy Patrol and Danny the Street back to back, they really are seamless. They are a continuation of one another.
Right. Absolutely. Like, yes, because it's all located in with the mansion. It's very much a bottled episode, but at the same time, you don't get the character moments you get in Danny Patrol without that build up. Mm-hmm. Especially with what happens with Jane.
Yeah.
Like that just comes out of nowhere then. So what was the point? Yep. All right. Well, I think that is it for us today. Will, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yes, you can find me at Will and Polk, WILLMPOLK.
And you can find me at SJ Belmont, SJBELMONT. Please follow our crew on Twitter at CNN Nerd. Friend us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, but most importantly, rate, subscribe, and comment on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Spotify. Good night, Geek Out. You're welcome.